I just want to welcome you this evening to the Teagasc Roscommon Longford webinar. This evening we are covering sheep topics, and just want to welcome you all here onto the webinar this evening. I suppose you can appreciate on a cold winter's evening that we have this evening that you can watch the webinar from the comfort of your own home and not have to get into your car and travel to a meeting. So this evening we have got two excellent speakers joining us. And before we get started, I'll just mention a few items that are relevant and important to farmers at this time of the year. Any of you who still have not yet submitted your sheep census, you still have time to do so via the online system on Ag Food, and the 15th of February is the deadline to get that completed. Another deadline there is the farm partnership. If you wish to put together a farm partnership, the deadline is the 26th of February, and it's an important job. You need to have your solicitor involved and your accountant, so it's important to get that completed in good time. I'll just also mention the TAMS 2 has now been extended. There's a new tranche there. The 16th of April is the closing date for that, and that would be very relevant to sheep farmers in respect of sheep fencing, sheep housing, and handling equipment. And I suppose another deadline, or something that you would need to get done urgently in the next while, would be the any farmer who wishes to apply for a new herd number or make any changes to their herd number. It's important that you get that done at this time of the year and get done in good time in advance of the 15th of May deadline for BPS. So that's a job you need to be working on now if you're considering making any changes to your herd number. Okay, I suppose this webinar is being recorded this evening. The format for this evening is we will have two presentations, two speakers, and I'll just introduce both of these this evening. First of all, we are going to have James Kelly, dry stock advisor based in the Roscommon office, and James will be speaking first. Secondly, we're going to have John Gilmore, who is, a lot of you will know, from FarmLab in Elphin, a local vet. So John will be our second speaker this evening. And if you have questions, if you look at the bottom of your screens, you'll see the Q&A tab. So you can type in your questions as you think of them this evening. You'll only be able to see your own question being typed. You won't see any of the other questions that are submitted, but we will get an answer for all of your questions where possible. And we have Brian Daly here, who will be looking after the questions and putting them to the two panelists here this evening. So approximately 20 minutes or so per speaker, and we'll have approximately 20 minutes or so at the end for questions. We'll try and get wrapped up and finished within the hour. If any of you are on mobiles, have your mobile phone well charged for the next hour or so. Yeah, look, I suppose without further ado, we'll get started, and I'll ask James there to start sharing his screen.
Okay, Sean, thanks very much there now. I'll just share this screen here. Can everybody see that there now?
Yeah, that looks good.
Good.
James.
Okay, thanks very much, Sean. We'll start off here. Tonight, we're going to talk about reducing lamb mortality on sheep farms. So what is lamb mortality? It's the lambs you're losing in around the lambing period, and it's a key figure on any sheep farm that can be monitored. We'll come on to that later, but the performance at lambing is going to have a huge effect on the profitability of any sheep enterprise, whether it be big or small. It's going to have a huge effect on the profitability of a sheep farm. So I have a point there. 50% of lambs die in the first 24 hours. Most of you that are tuned in here tonight, You all have sheep at home, and I think you'd all concur with that, that half of the lambs are lost straight away in the first hour. And if you go to 48 hours, 80% of the lambs are lost. That's coming off a 2-year study that was done in Athenry with 477 lambs, and they're the reality figures, that 80% is being lost in the first 48 hours. So that first period of the lamb's life, that first day or two, is key. If you can get them over that initial day or two, weather being good, lamb being healthy, all else being equal, he should be okay. So what's a target for lamb mortality on a sheep farm? Target there we have is 12%. Now, we've ran groups in Roscommon over the last couple of years. It's a very good sheep county, plenty of sheep in it. And that figure can go up as far as 20%, and that figure can come down to 6%. So, depending on weather, depending on disease, depending on a range of different factors, depending on supervision, there's a lot of factors that can influence lamb mortality. And weather, supervision, disease, everything has an effect. So, where are we today? So, I started off here today. We're on the 10th of February. So, I'm picking a fairly average flock here. Where are we today? A farmer has his yaw scanned. Most farmers have their yaw scanned. Figure there, fairly average figure is 1.8 lambs per yaw. That's a fairly average figure. He's lambing them in March, be it the 1st of March, be it the 31st of March. Most sheep lamb in that month. It's the busiest month. And he's weaning in early July, late July. So today I've scanned them. I'm going to lamb them in March, and I'm going to wean them in July. So there's two key figures on that. When a scanner comes into the yard and he scans your sheep and he goes out the gate, you have a figure of how many lambs per yaw you have led to the ram. When you wean them, it's very easy. Count them after weaning them out here in July. You'll know how many lambs you're weaning. Take one from the other, that's the mortality. As a percentage, we're aiming for it to be less than 12%. So if we look at those figures there, 1.8 lambs per yaw, weaning 1.6, that's coming in at 12% mortality. And that's a good performance. That's a good performance. Weaning 1.6 lambs per yaw is a very good performance. Nationally, this has been a problem. On the sheep flock, it was down as far as 1.25. I think it's crept up to 1.4 now nationally. But 1.6 will be a good performance, for any sheep farmer to be hitting. So these are the benchmark figures. These are the benchmark figures that we look for in a lamb and flock, these two key figures. So what are the causes of lamb mortality? You all know yourself what the causes are. You have disease. I won't go into that now. John is going to cover a bit on that, on the Toxoplasmosis inzo. You'll have starvation, lambs not sucking, hypothermia, cold weather, various different things like weak lambs, infections, etc. So this study here was done by Tim Keady and Alan Bohan in Athenry in 2009. It looked at 477 lambs, and it went around on a range of farms and took a survey. So some of the key findings on the survey was 23% of farmers, they're not cleaning out the pins at all or putting any level of disinfectant on them. So when you're in the middle of lambing, it is hard to keep on top of it. Like most farmers that are lambing yaws, it's a one-man show. It's very hard to get around and get everything done. But in terms of disinfectant, if you could lime the pins, put straw on them, we'll come on to that later. Hygiene is key. Colostrum there. 9% of farmers, believe it or believe it not, were only using artificial colostrum. So if a yaw hadn't enough colostrum, they were just mixing up the artificial Survivor or whatever brands are out there and giving it to the yaws or giving it to the lambs. And Dicosia. Dicosia is basically oversized lambs. 68% of farmers are scanning, but they don't know their lambing date. So, okay, if you scanned your yaws last week and they're lambing in March, they could be lambing on the 1st of March, they could be lambing on the 31st of March. There's a big difference there in the month. That's where rattling of the ram comes in. If the ram is rattled when he goes out to the yaws, you have yellow being your first color, green being your second, on and in, red, blue, black. So it gives you an idea. So farmers, basically, dichosia comes from basically overfeeding ewes, feeding them too early, too much handling, lambs getting too big. So oversized lambs. So ideally, if you have nice sized lamb coming, he'll come out quick, he'll have a normal delivery, there'll be no stress on him, he should be able to get up and suck. So what can I do to reduce my losses this year? So I suppose the first thing any farmer can do is look back on last year. Like, okay, it's been a very quick year with Corona, but most of you now are lambing in the month of March here. You can look back and see what the problem was last year. Had you disease? Had you enough straw? Did infection get in? Had you enough lambing pins, etc.? So the first thing to do is, I know it's 11 months ago, but still review the last year and see what you can do different this year. So two focus areas for any farm, and I'm just going to focus on these two areas tonight because I think they're key, is the pre-lambing management of the ewe and the hygiene at lambing. The pre-lambing management, what I mean here is, say, this 6-week period, 4 to 6 week period before the ewe actually lambs. It's the husbandry of the ewe pre-lambing. The hygiene at lambing is when the ewe is going to lamb, just before she's going to lamb, and thereafter. So pre-lambing management is key. Very much like what they say, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. If the preparation is good with the ewe, all else being equal, you're onto a good start. Like, so we look where we are today. Ewes are scanned. I have their group fed. Obviously, when you scan them, you're going to group feed them. Triplets are going to be fed a while longer. They're going to be fed more. Twins are going to be fed. Singles probably are going to be fed for 2 weeks beforehand. So some farmers say, do the singles need feeding at all? I would imagine they would, because on heavily scanned flocks, if you don't feed the singles for a small period of time, you're going to end up with ewes with not enough milk for cross fostering. So you're looking at three potential groups there. You're looking at singles, you're looking at twins, you're looking at triplets. Listen, your target is to feed the triplets, listen, 7 weeks out, get them up to 0.8, 0.9 of a kilo per day. If you're feeding that level of meal, it's recommended to split it. Once you go above 0.6, 0.7, you'd have to be splitting the meal into 2 feeds in a day. Your your twin sheep, you're going to be feeding them 6 weeks out. You're going to be starting at 0.2 of a kilo, gradually building it up to 0.7 of a kilo. So again, the scanning groups, if you have a few, you're going to look at body condition score as well. It's not just all about scanning. Like if you have a few ewes that are in poor body condition score and they're carrying twins, obviously you could move them in with triplets. There's no set hard and fast rule in how you're going to feed sheep. So the body condition score and the litter size is going to affect your feeding program. The other thing that's going to affect your feeding program is the quantity or the quality of your silage. If you have poor quality silage, the ewes are in poor body condition score, you're going to have to feed them longer out, you're going to have to feed them more. The silage is very good, not going to have to feed them as much, and you're going to have to feed over a shorter period. Most of you here on the call tonight, the stable diet for ewes in this region is bale silage and nuts thereafter, be it inside or be it outside. So you can't do much about your silage now. It's the way it is. Meal, you're looking to feed a nut with a fairly good protein content. What we would recommend is the higher soybean content, the better. Okay. Why we're focusing on soybean meal is soybean meal has an undigestible protein that bypasses the rumen and is available to the lambs through absorption in the small intestine. So basically, if you have a ration, would say 16-20% soybean meal in it, and you're feeding up on 0.9 of a kilo, 0.8 of a kilo to a triplet, at the other end, you have 200 grams available to the lambs in the ewe. So the soybean meal content, ideally, is an important figure on a ration fed to ewes in the last 4 weeks. Feed management, what I mean by there is enough trough space. You're talking 2-foot troughs, you're talking 600 mils, you're talking sheep not pushing, you're talking about a system so that you can put sheep below a gate so that they're not all pushing, shoving you, an even spread of meal in a trough. So various different things. It seems simple, but it all leads to better feed management. Lameness, whether you're feeding in a shed or whether you're feeding outdoors, conditions get very mucky around troughs. Lameness can spread. If you get foot rot, be it in a shed or be it outside, the environment there can be very round troughs, round damp, wet straw. The environment for foot rot, it can spread like wildfire. You'd like to isolate them yos, treat them, and try and get them better. If you have yos getting very lame, body condition score will fall off them. You know, it could lead to prolapse on some yos if they're very lame. They're not eating as much either. They're not traveling as much if they're outdoors. Vaccines, I'm not going to go too much into this. John might cover this, but the 8-in-1 booster vaccine should be given to yos 3 weeks out. You'll be looking so you can get passive immunity across to the lamb. So all this proper feed management, if all this period goes well, like if the ewes are scanned, they're fed according to litter size, feed management is good, no pushing at troughs, no lameness, you should be able to reduce the incidences of prolapse, the incidences of twin lamb disease, various different things, milk fever at lamb and various different things. So you're off to a great start if you can manage the O properly for this 6-week period. So the target there for this 6-week period is, give or take now, these figures aren't an exact science, but you're targeting single yos to have a lamb with a body weight of 6 kilos, twins body weight of 5 kilos, triplets body weight of 4 kilos. So in or around 5 kilo lamb. If it's a triplet, it's going to be a bit smaller. If it's a single, it's going to be a bit bigger. And thereafter, adequate colostrum. Now, what I mean by adequate colostrum is enough quality and enough quantity to feed the lambs the ewes have. There's nothing as bad as a ewe lambing down, no beastons, no colostrum. Next thing you're going mixing stuff. It's not as good. It's not a good start. But the management of the ewe in the 6 weeks beforehand, how you manage this ewe in the next 4 weeks, is going to have a huge bearing on birth weight and colostrum quality. So we'll encourage questions on this. We'll take questions. Brian, you'll be able to take questions. So if any of you have questions on that period, you can voice them there this evening or put them down on the Q&A tab. So second section here, hygiene at lambing. Basically, whether you're lambing indoors or whether you're lambing outdoors, bringing them in at night time, bringing them in for lambing pins are key. So preparation is key here. A lot of you here are 3 weeks out from lambing. You could be 4 weeks, 6 weeks out from lambing. Preparation is key. You don't go making the pins up the day the ewes are starting to lamb. Number of pins per ewe, very much dependent on the weather. As a guideline figure, 8 to 10 pins per 100 ewes. Again, if the weather is good, you're only going to be using 5 or 6. If you get 2 or 3 bad days of weather and lambs have to be kept in for a few days, you're going to use 10. Again, if that can be fluid, if you could get up to 12 even, if you had the capacity to put in more pins with weather being wet, all the better. Straw, for every 10 lambing pins that are being used over the lambing period, you'd be using around 4 to 5 bales of straw. Now, straw is a key component of any lambing. Like, it's keeping the shed clean. Like, if you're not using enough straw, even on the ewes before they're lambing, you know, you're getting lameness. The ewes' teats are getting dirt on them. The wool on the ewe is getting dirt, and it's all leading to an environmental challenge to the lamb. So if the ewe is after lambing, if her wool is dirty, her legs are dirty, there's dirt on her teeth, it's all adding to infection source to the lamb. Lime and pin, that's straightforward enough. Put it on. Hopefully, it's a disinfectant. Water as well. Watering in pins. Like, in an ideal scenario, you'd have a bucket for watering in each pin. Like, so once a ewe lambs, there's a huge demand for water. Like, there's a huge fetal fluid loss. There's a huge colostrum loss. Like I was there saying adequate colostrum. What do I mean by adequate colostrum? I'm saying 1 litre per lamb in the first 24 hours. So if I have a twin yo and she lambs down, my target is for her to produce 2 litres of colostrum in the first 24 hours. Now she will produce it if the lambs are sucking her. If she has 2 5 kilo lambs, they're healthy, they're sucking, she's well fed, well nourished, she's going to produce up on that. So that is the target. So if she's producing that and she has fetal loss, it's amazing the amount of water she's taking in. So lambing equipment, I have a slide here on it. We have the ropes, we have the lubricant, we have the iodine there, the iodine being very important for preventing joint heal, and we have gloves. Just a point this year on gloves, due to the coronavirus and the demand for PPE gear, gloves are a little bit harder got this year. The supply isn't there like other years. So it would be advisable for those that are going lambing to stock up on gloves now so that you're not looking for them in the middle of lambing. The other point I have on that slide there is the stomach tuber. A lot of farmers using it. I'm going to do a little bit on that, on the hygiene of that stomach tuber. But just before we move on the equipment there, the 10% iodine pump. So when a lamb comes out of the O, this goes back to the straw. When a lamb comes out of the O, there's two huge cavities for infection. One is the lamb's navel. It's basically like a straw straight up into the guts of the lamb. So when the lamb comes out, it's like a straw, it's wide open. Anything can go up there if the environment is poor. It's one source of infection. The other source of infection is through the mouth. So when the lambs come out, we spray 10% iodine on it to dry it up as quick as possible. It's a drying agent to dry it up to stop bacteria going up through the navel, using the bloodstream to go up through the navel. On the iodine, we recommend spraying. People do be dipping, but if there is joint heal and you're dipping navels with a jar of iodine, you could be passing infection from one lamb to the other. So we recommend spraying. On the stomach tube hygiene, after each lamb, we're recommending that it is sterilized. You can use Milton, a 3-bucket system. You're going to wash out the stomach tuber, you're going to sanitize it, and you'll have it ready for the next day, ready for the next period, ready to go. Ideally, you'd have 2 or 3 of them in a lambing shed so that there'll always be a clean, sterilized one available. Like, if I have a lamb and he's weak in himself, and he's 2-3 days old and he has watery mouth and you're still stomach tubing him, say a 2 days old lamb, next thing you start stomach tubing newborn lambs, you're basically planting the bacteria straight into the stomach of the lamb, so he hasn't much chance starting off. So the stomach tube hygiene is very important there, to keep cleaning it, keep it disinfected during lambing.
2 minutes, James.
Yeah, so just the last slide here, Seán. Last slide on colostrum. We mentioned quantity and quality. If I have a lamb, 50 mils per kg. So if the lamb is 5 kgs, we're talking 250 mils of colostrum going into the lamb. So most of the stomach tubers are 60 mils. You're talking 4 stomach tubes of colostrum into the lamb. I've covered the joint hill there. I've covered the navel. On the scour, if the colostrum is getting into the lamb, you're preventing watery mouth, you're preventing E. coli scours. The lamb is getting passive immunity from the colostrum. If he's getting sufficient quantity of colostrum, it's sound. The 3 things for the colostrum are they're providing energy for the lamb, they're giving laxative to get the lamb's stomach moving, and they're giving passive immunity. So getting the colostrum into the lamb is very important. But if the O isn't minded for the next 4 to 6 weeks, there will be a problem. And the final slide I have here, I think it's one of the most important ones, is farmers' health. Lambing on farms, 4 to 6 weeks, it can be a very busy period for farmers. A lot of farmers, as I said out there, help isn't as plentiful as it used to be. And a lot of farmers that are lambing, it's a one-man show. It's 4 to 6 weeks, busy period. Maybe get in a bit of rest before it, be rested before it starts. Second thing there is there's a lot of diseases in the lambing shed that are transmissible across to humans. John will do a little bit on them now. He'll go through the toxo and the inzo. So health and hygiene from the lamb shed, hygiene from the lamb shed to the living room and the kitchen is very important. And the final point I have to make, Sean, on the whole lambing thing is lads should be preparing now, getting lambing pins, getting equipment, looking after the yo. You know, it's amazing what preparation can do all round. So we'll take questions afterwards, Sean. And
Okay. That's great, James. And if you can just stop sharing, yeah, that's great. Well done, James, and thanks very much for that. Plenty of tips there for all sheep farmers. I'll ask John just to switch on his camera. And just before, when John is getting his presentation up, I'll just mention that going forward, we will be running our webinars on a Monday night from now on. And our next webinar is due on Monday, the 22nd of February. So just keep that in mind, keep the date in your diary, and we'll be in touch with you. We'll send you on the link for registration. Any of you who are registered tonight, you will be getting the reminders as you have been. Okay, so we'll move on to our next presenter, and that is John Gilmore from FarmLab Diagnostics in Elphin, and he's local vet there. And we'll ask John to just
so
you have
can
it
you
there.
hear me?
Yeah, you're fine, John. We can hear you now. Great.
Thanks very much, Sean. So what I hope to cover here is, as we said already, a bit about how to manage ewes coming up to lambing to try and improve lamb survival and reduce mortality. And James has outlined a lot of the key points around the whole area of improving lamb mortality. And I suppose, as Sean has mentioned, I'm a vet. I've been, I suppose, dealing with this whole area now for a good number of years. And to my mind, the single most important thing in ensuring that you have the most number of viable lambs to sell at the end of the year is how the ewe is managed coming up to lambing and how she's prepared for that. And I think that's the same with any kind of breeding stock. And so that's the areas that we're going to focus on. And I suppose starting off with that, James has mentioned, I'm not going to go into it, but it is very important that your ewes are fed adequately. He mentioned about scanning, and if feeding isn't going into the sheep, then you're not going to have lambs that are fit and ewes that are going to have enough milk when they're dropped, and colostrum and everything else. And tied into that is handling your ewes. Probably for people going lambing shortly, it's probably getting a little bit late for body condition scoring, but it is still useful to go through the ewes and see how they're handling and tie that in with your scanning and decide on what you're going to do with feeding. And James has talked about the feeding levels. The other thing that was mentioned was vaccination. And again, coming up to lambing is a time to boost the ewe's immunity to the clostridial diseases, and by either using the vaccines that are out there, the 8-in-1 or 10-in-1, Covaxin, Heptavac, Tribivax, they can all be given 3 to 4 weeks pre-lambing, and that increases the levels of antibodies in the colostrum that the lamb will take in when the lamb is born, and help prevent those clostridial diseases in the first few weeks of life of the lamb. As James has said, most of the lambs that are going to die will die in the first 24, 48 hours of life. And in actual fact, when you tie in the figures there relating to abortion as well, they're a big contributor to reduced numbers of lambs, or reduced numbers of lambs available to sell at the end of the year. The other thing James mentioned about foot rot, it's not something that a huge amount of people use, but it is a useful, if you're considering about vaccination, it does have a place in certain flocks, particularly if you're in bother with high numbers of ewes with foot rot, particularly coming up to housing, or if you're putting in ewes, or you're going putting in ewes into a shed, and it is a useful tool along with foot bathing and all the other treatments that we talk about for lameness. And one of the things to be aware of, James mentioned about foot rot and how it'll knock the sheep back, she won't eat and everything else, and she'll lose condition. And another issue that can happen with foot rot, which isn't hugely common, but it does happen, is that the bacteria that are present in the ewes' feet. So if you've got a big percentage of ewes that have got foot rot, they're passing the foot rot bacteria around on the bedding. And if you've got lambs then being born in the shed and they come in contact with that foot rot bacteria, James mentioned about the navel being open at lambing. The infection from the foot rot can travel up the navel, and you get a particular type of navel infection that can cause liver abscesses and high mortality in lambs. And how we see that then is some of these lambs, you open them up, they've got big white abscesses inside in the liver within a few days of being born, and those lambs won't survive. So again, foot rot and lameness is a problem in sheep, and it can also be a problem for the lambs. So just something to be aware of. Again, if you're interested in knowing, what the status of your sheep are coming up to lambing, it's useful to know if they're getting adequate minerals. So we can take blood samples for minerals, and again, it's something that's useful to do kind of 5 to 6 weeks pre-lambing to see what the mineral status is of the sheep, just in case there's some farms are more deficient in certain minerals than others, and it may help guide you in what minerals you need to feed the ewes coming up to lambing. The other thing that you can't monitor for is energy balance. So you can take 5 or 6 ewe samples, or depending on the size of the flock, and you can look for BHB and basically two tests. So you look for, everyone has heard of ketosis, you look for the indicators of ketosis, and if they're there in high levels, you know that your feeding isn't right and you need to do something about it. And it's better to know that rather than running into a lot of problems around lambing, or maybe with ewes going down. And when, at least if it's a little bit further out, you can do something about it. So then we mentioned about sheep abortion, and I think that this is an issue that's probably, to my mind, is something that's probably a lot more widespread than a lot of people realize. And I think that a lot of people kind of have an acceptance when you talk about, and I've talked about this at different meetings before and with different farmers and stuff, people expect that there's going to be naturally a certain number of sheep that are going to throw lambs or sling lambs or abort, basically coming up to lambing. And you'll see that you'll see that before the main ewe crop goes lambing. The reason for that obviously is that if a ewe is going to abort, she's going to lamb prematurely. So you may start to see these maybe a week, 10 days, a fortnight before the main ewe crop is going to start lambing. And how that'll be seen then, it'll be in a variety of ways. You may see either ewes throwing out dead lambs, or you may see ewes, sometimes you have issues with maybe ewes not opening up right for lambing, so they can be partial dilation or incomplete cervixes or ringworms. The other thing that you'll see sometimes is maybe one big lamb, one small, maybe not viable lamb. And I suppose since we started getting involved in this, I started to realize that what's listed here are two of the main causes of abortion in sheep. One of them is Chlamydia abortus, which causes enzootic abortion, and the other one is Toxoplasmosis, which people will probably be more familiar with than Chlamydia. Now, up until recently, I suppose Toxoplasma was blamed for a lot of the abortion in sheep, and we kind of accepted that there was a certain level of toxoplasma, and I'll go into the difference between these two different causes of abortion in the next few slides. But we started testing. So this what you have here actually is a piece that was taken. It's just from the Farmers Journal. It was actually a piece that MSD supported, who supplied some of the vaccines for abortion in sheep, and so it was basically creating awareness that we can test for these two different types of abortion. So up until this year, we were testing for these two as part of this pack. Now we can also test for two of the other main causes of disease of abortion in sheep. That's Campylobacter and Salmonella. But essentially, over the last number of years, we found that nearly half of abortions in sheep have been caused by either enzootic abortion or by toxoplasmosis. Now, we said that we'd talk a little bit about the difference between the two. So, and actually going back to that, I suppose how I started to realize that chlamydia or enzootic abortion is more common than we had realized in this part of the world. We always kind of accepted that it was a disease that was present more in northern counties than it is around here. But over the last couple of years, I've actually taken some samples from some ewes that came to the veterinary clinic where they had problems lambing. You can give an example of one in particular where a ewe that didn't open properly for lambing. We did a section on her, and when we had the section done, we took out two kind of these, what I describe as watery belly kind of lambs, and the lambs survived for a few minutes and then died. And so we took a sample from the lambs and from the ewe, and it turned up that ewe was infected with enzootic abortion. So it is something that's there. It is something that's causing a lot of lamb loss, and it is something that unless you realize it's there, you can't do anything about it. So how does chlamydia work? So chlamydia basically is a disease that comes into the flock through carrier ewes. So you buy in ewes, or you buy in ewe lambs, or you buy in hoggets. Those ewes go on lamb. Some of them will lamb normally. Some of them will abort. And but what happens when they go lambing is that their birth fluids inside in the shed are infectious to the other ewes. They will spread it to the other sheep that are in contact with them. So ewes that are housed tend to have come in contact with it more than outdoor sheep, but it can spread in outdoor systems as well. So those other ewes usually will become infected during that lambing season. So say I had bought some ewes last year that were carrying chlamydia. They come into my lambing shed today. They lamb down next week. The other ewes that were in the flock beforehand come in contact with that chlamydia. They're carrying lambs, but it's too late in the year for these ewes for their lambs to become infected this year. So they go on and lamb normally. You don't pass any heat on it, but you realize that some of these ewes that you bought, maybe the lambs, you didn't end up with much lambs out of them at the end of the year. And but what you find out then is next year, so these ewes that are infected in the lambing shed this year, plus any ewe lambs or any other dry ewes that was in the shed, become what's called latently infected. So they become infected, but you don't know they're infected. It's a bit like people who have COVID in the early stages, or maybe aren't detectable, but they're still latently infected. And then those ewes run with the ram. They go in lamb. You think everything is hunky dory. You do your scanning, as James has said. You're getting nice figures, 1.8 lambs per ewe scanned, and then you start lambing, or you come up near lambing, and next thing you go out into the shed, and there's a ewe with a loo out, or a ewe with passing an afterbirth, and lambs aren't coming right, or she's before her time, or she's not bagged up, and you say to yourself that ewe is after getting a poke or whatever. But to my mind, in a lot of situations, these ewes don't get pokes. It's not from pushing each other at the trough. A lot of them, there's a reason why they're aborting, and a lot of the time it's an infection, and a lot of the time that can be prevented by vaccination. Now, what can you do in that situation? So you can take samples. So if you have got some, and I'll show you how we do that, but if you've got some ewes or some lambs that are aborted, you can take samples. Now, the benefit of taking samples early in the outbreak is that with chlamydia in particular, as kind of an emergency treatment, if you find out that that's what's causing your abortion and you're afraid that you may have a lot more ewes that are going to do it, or you've already had quite a few and you've got maybe another bundle of ewes that are going to start dropping in 3 or 4 weeks' time, you can inject all those with long-acting antibiotic. But again, we'll talk a little bit about antibiotic use and why we're trying to cut down on antibiotic use at the end of the talk, but that is something that you can do if you find out that that is the problem. So then when you compare that to toxoplasmosis, a lot of people will have heard of toxoplasmosis, and the cat gets the blame for this disease. So basically, and this tends to be disease in younger ewes. So a lot of people will be familiar with the fact that you either put ewe lambs in lamb, or you buy in hoggets, and in the first year you can have problems. You buy 10 hoggets and 2 or 3 of them sling lambs, or they end up with these kind of dirty looking broken down kind of lambs. Sometimes it can happen, as I said earlier, that you'll end up in a situation where you'll have 1 live lamb and 1 dead lamb. Sometimes you'll have maybe 2 poor weak lambs that you're trying to get going, and they won't survive, or they'll die whatever you do with them after the first day or two. And a lot of the time these are infected either with toxo or with chlamydia before they're born. So basically what happens here is, depending on the stage of pregnancy, when the cat basically gets infected from a mouse, usually the cat goes into the lambing shed. It may dirty the bedding, it may dirty the straw or hay, or if it has access to the meal, it may dirty the meal. So the cat's feces then is infectious for the sheep. The sheep get this, goes into the lamb, and depending on what stage the ewe is infected at, she can throw lambs, or she can end up giving birth to kind of non-viable lambs if it's nearer to lamb. So James mentioned earlier on that some of these diseases can be just transmissible to humans, and it's something that I suppose as vets we're conscious of, that these diseases, particularly toxoplasmosis, are a risk to pregnant women, and it is something to be aware of, that if you have people helping, or if indeed you're the farmer yourself and you're female and you're pregnant, then you probably shouldn't be in the lambing shed, and that's just something to be aware of. So then if you are running into problems with ewes aborting, what do you do? So we mentioned the fact about taking samples, and we look at kind of, I suppose this is more a checklist this is out of a veterinary journal, and this is more an idea of what a vet would do if you go to your vet and say, look, I'm having a lot of problems with ewes aborting, and they're looking at things like, are the ewes housed for lambing? Again, that ties into, the increased likelihood maybe of chlamydia spreading, or maybe toxo if the ewes are being fed. And again, there can be other things that cause abortion, but I'll show you the figures, the breakdown on what they find. And looking at your scanning data, have any of the ewes been vaccinated for chlamydia or toxo? And that will feed into kind of what you suspect may be causing the abortion on the farm. So this is UK information. I just took this because it's a nice graph, but this is out of all of where they found a diagnosis for abortion within the samples that were submitted in the UK. Approximately 37% of them chlamydia, 30% toxo, Campylobacter another 9%, Salmonella 6%. We can see in Ireland that we have approximately 40% toxo, 26% chlamydia. This figure is from 2016. I'd say it could actually be gone up by now. And salmonella is quite low, funny enough. We've had a few cases of salmonella in sheep diagnosed recently in aborted samples. So how do you test for this? Obviously, if you're running into a lot of problems, the ideal situation is that the whole fetus and placenta will go to your regional veterinary laboratory. So that's your Department of Agriculture laboratory. The test that we do is carried out on a piece of the placenta, so a piece of the cotyledon, which essentially is the button of the placenta, and it's important that it comes through the vet. There's a number of reasons for that. It needs to be packaged properly, so as it goes through the postal system, okay, or if we're using a courier. And there are risks, as we've said, so it needs to go in the appropriate package and be labeled properly. And as well as that, for advising on what needs to be done afterwards, depending on what shows up and which vaccinations could be used or whatever. So this is the swab sample that it comes in the packet. You can, ideally you're swabbing the surface of the lamb. This lamb is very dried out, but usually there'll be more birth fluids. You need to sample the surface of the lamb, swab the cleaning as well. The swab is essentially like a cotton wool or a cotton bud, and you'll all be familiar with these kind of cotyledons. These are the areas, and this is a fetus. So this is just two examples of, and it's hard to know by just visually inspecting the placenta, but this is a placenta that came from a ewe with enzymatic abortion, and these are more kind of, I tend to say they're more dirtier looking, they tend to be more gone off, whereas this is more fleshy looking. The placenta that comes with chlamydia tends to be with toxo, you get more kind of putrid, foul kind of breakdown at the placenta. But these are the areas we need to sample with the swab. These are the swabs here. So they're essentially, as I said, like long cotton buds, go into the sealed bag, then they go into an envelope, and you drop back that into your vet and they'll send it off to us. So a lot of practices have these already and they can send them on to us. When they come into us in the lab, then we run basically it's a fairly sophisticated test, but it's a PCR test. So essentially what we're doing is we're looking for DNA of the organism that we're looking for to see if it's there, and if it's there in very small quantities, we can detect it with the test that we use. So
less than 2 minutes there, John.
Okay, so that's basically all I'm going to say on enzymatic abortion and toxo. The only other thing that I'll say is that people, wonder about the cost of this, and I know that I don't keep too many sheep, but I started vaccinating for both of these things a few years ago, and since then it has dramatically changed the number of it has dramatically improved the lamb survivability and everything else, and that's a relatively small flock. But people talk about the cost of it. If you go out to buy a pin of hoggets, a lot of the time they don't really look into whether it's €180 or €190 they give for the hoggets, and to my mind, it's something that should be included in the price of the hoggets the day you buy them. Vaccination lasts for a long time, generally lasts for life. So one shot of each vaccine will protect the ewe. James mentioned about colostrum. I'm not going to say anything more about it. I heard someone talking about colostrum years ago about calves. They said when a calf is born, it's really only half a calf. The other half is still in the cow's udder. And if you don't get the half that's from the cow's udder into the calf, you always have half a calf. It's the same with lambs. Their immune system is in the ewe's udder. If it doesn't get into the lamb, or if the ewe doesn't have enough milk, you've got a lamb that doesn't have an immune system. Then you're going to have watery mouth, you're going to have navel infections, you're going to have all those other diseases. We said that we'd mention a little bit about antibiotic resistance. We're not going to have much time to talk about it, but it is something to be aware of. A lot of the time, we can manage some of these diseases by using antibiotics. We talked about joint and navel infections. We use antibiotics to treat those. We talked about foot rot again. Antibiotics are used to treat those. We even talked about enzymatic abortion, and antibiotics sometimes are used as an emergency measure. We are going to have to reduce the amount of antibiotics that we use in the next couple of years. This is going to be policy that is going to come in, and we aren't going to have to look at trying to prevent diseases more rather than treating them when they happen. And that doesn't matter whether it's cattle or sheep or what animals we're dealing with. We are going to have less antibiotics that we can use in the future. And it is important that we look at ways we can minimize antibiotic usage on farm. That's the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for listening, and happy to take whatever questions.
Great. John, thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Now, if you can just, that's great. You can stop sharing. Yeah. Okay, so look, we've moved over now to the final, I suppose, section of the evening, and we have a good number of questions that have come in there. So I'll hand it over to Brian there. Just unmute yourself there, Brian. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And you can take over this section here. Okay.
Lovely, Seán. Thank you. No, lads, well done. Both very excellent presentations, and there is quite a few questions in already. And if any more come in, by all means, I'll try and ask them as they come up. James, I suppose since you've done the first presentation, I will start off with you. And the very first question in on the night was, would you have any tips on fostering lambs, i.e. given transferring a triplet onto a single bearing ewe? Would there be any tips that you'd recommend off the top of your head?
Well, I suppose the best thing, Brian, is the ewes have to be lambing fairly close together. Like the ewes, ideally, if you could have the ewes lambing close together in the same hour or two, like if they were lambing around the same time, ideally. Second thing is, when you are cross fostering lambs, you'd always pick on a triplet, you'd always pick the bigger lamb to match across. You'd try and size up the lambs at the one size. So you'd try and get the lambs, you'd try and have them the same. The lamb that will be cross fostered across to the single, you'd try and have it the same size. Wet fostering. Listen, the success is going to be better if you have a bucket and you're able to mix the fetal fluids for the sheep. Keep the sheep down. Don't let her see the switch of the lambs. Basically, collect the fetal fluids of the single, if you like, and mix the two lambs together and try and convince the ewe that it's her own lamb. So wet fostering, balance the lamb, and the tighter they are lambing together, the better they are. Okay.
Okay, that's very good. And I suppose there's a couple of questions here in relation to colostrum, and I suppose we'll group them together. I think you answered it really in your presentation, but maybe to reinforce the point is in relation to how much would you be feeding per kg of body weight of colostrum. Secondly, from an artificial point of view, artificial colostrum, any preferences? And finally, there's a very good question here in relation to refractometer. Would you recommend using a refractometer to test the colostrum quality? So I guess there's three questions in one there, James.
Okay, the first one there, Brian, on how much, you'll be talking 50 mils per kilo of body weight of a lamb. So if you have a standard lamb that's coming in 5 kilos, you're talking about 250 mils stomach tube, 60 mil stomach tube. You're talking 4 stomach tubes basically. So you're putting in a fair quantity of colostrum to the lamb. Now that's, some farmers get that hard to understand, that quantity of colostrum going into a lamb, but that's the recommended figure. You're talking 4 stomach tubes for a fairly good size 5 kilo lamb. In terms of artificial colostrum, not ideal. Ideally, you'll have a store of it. You'll be milking it from a ewe that is surplus colostrum. You'll freeze it. The thawing out is very important. You'll thaw it out very slowly. Like if you freeze the colostrum in a freezer, the thawing out has to be done very slowly, or you'll kill the antibodies in the colostrum. So artificial colostrum, it's better than nothing, but ideally you'd have a bank of it from other ewes. And the refractometer, okay, it will tell you the quality of the colostrum, but at that stage, if you're testing colostrum with a refractometer, there's not a lot you can do about it. The colostrum is there, the ewe is lambed, not a lot can be done about it. The only thing I'd say on colostrum quality is, the better the source of protein that's fed to the ewe, the better the quality of the colostrum. So if you're feeding the ewe with a fairly high soybean meal content protein. That's undigestible protein in the rumen. It goes straight across to the small intestine. So the quality of the protein in the ration is key. The Rolls Royce of protein in a ration is soybean meal. So refractometer is good. At that point, you can't do a lot about it. What you can do is in the last 2 weeks, feed a nut with as high a soybean meal content as you can get.
Okay, thank you. That's very good, James. 2 final questions, and then I might go over to John and give you a break for a moment or two. In relation to feeding meal post-lambing, what levels would you recommend? I suppose that question is as long as it is short. There's a lot of answers to that question. And I have a question here from a farmer who had 2 triplet-bearing ewes that are after dying on them, after pushing out their intestines 5 weeks out from lambing. Have you any suggestions what might be wrong there with their feeding regime, or is it a feeding regime problem?
Right, the meal feeding post lambing, Brian, that's going to be very much dependent on the body condition score of the old lambing down. Like, if you're lambing post Patrick's Day, your grassland management is fairly good, the body condition of the ewe. So if you're lambing post St. Patrick's Day, grassland is good supply of grass. The ewe is in good body condition score, 3.5. She's gone off with 2 lambs. There should really be no need to supplement that, Joe. But I'm going to ask the question back to yourselves there. I know you can't come in, but how many people have this quality of grass and have enough quantity to keep the ewe going after lambing? So it all boils down to the body condition of the ewe at lambing and the quantity of grass. Fine, you don't need to feed meal if you have body condition score of 3.5. Ewe in good condition, grass is going to be there till the 1st of May. Grand, no problem. I can see no problem. But how many farms are there like that out there? In terms of supplementing, very much depends on the grass supply. A lot of lads go in with 300 to 500 grams for a couple of weeks just to get up to peak lactation. You will get to peak lactation in the first 3 weeks. So if you get it, the higher you get her up, the more milk she's going to have on the fall off in lactation. In terms of the other question there, you have basically you're describing intestinal prolapse. John, you might come in on that. You'll always listen on 100 ewes, you'll have 1 or 2. Do you know what I mean? But if it does get up to a figure of say 4, 5, 6, you're looking at a calcium magnesium problem in the diet. That would be my take on that intestinal prolapse. If it starts getting up to figures of 4%, I wouldn't like it going up to 3-4%. You'd be talking about putting in lick buckets with a high calcium magnesium content in it for muscle balance. John, have you any thoughts on intestinal prolapse? That's what I've seen it before, and that stopped it on a farm going in with CalMag buckets. So what do you think yourself, John?
I'd be thinking that with prolapse, definitely with vaginal prolapse, then it could be related to your calcium magnesium. I suppose there's also the possibility that with intestinal prolapse, a lot of the time it comes down to just is basically described as spontaneous rupture of the vagina. So basically, you get a tear in the upper wall of the vagina, and that allows the intestines to prolapse out. And when you see that, a lot of the time, then the ewe is either dead or she's going to die fairly soon. And I would imagine that in most situations, it's just a coincidence that there happen to be 2 on the same farm in short succession. It's a weakness. It can be a weakness, a genetic weakness. So if they're all bred from the same, if they're from the same ram, or if they're from the same ewe and ram, then possibly there's a genetic link. But so it's a weakness essentially a lot of the time in the vaginal wall. It just tears, and it can be down to increased pressure there when you have, especially this person talked about having triplets, their ewes are carrying triplets, so there's more pressure on the vaginal wall. So that can be the other thing that causes it.
Okay, thanks, John and James. I suppose, John, there's a good few questions coming in here, so I'll try and start off with some easier ones, and maybe we can work our way up. The first question here is in relation to scour halt. Should it be given at birth as a prevention?
So people have been using it traditionally because they run into problems with watery mouth, and watery mouth is caused by E. coli, and ideally we need to start moving away from this routine use of antibiotics, as we talked about during the presentation there. So in a lot of farms, actually, people have just been using it because it's something that they did on maybe one or two occasions. It seemed to work, it cut down on lamb losses in a particular year, and they kept with it. So in some farms, you know, the watery mouth still isn't a problem there. And it is something that I would be looking to reduce, if at all possible, on farms.
Okay.
And a lot of the time when you move away from it, you don't actually need it.
Absolutely. Okay. And again, I suppose a strange one here, but do cats of all ages spread toxoplasmosis?
Yeah, so a lot of people, the cat gets the blame, and then everyone is out for the cat. What happens with the cat is that the cat tends to spread for a fairly short period of time. So getting rid of the cat isn't often isn't the solution. But yeah, cats of any age can spread it, but because of the fact that the cat gets it, starts shedding, and then tends to get a high degree of immunity to it, I suppose it tends to be younger cats more so than older cats that will spread it to the pregnant
Okay.
dog.
Okay. A question here in relation to an outbreak of chlamydia, and you vaccinate the following year. Will this solve the problem? Will this solve the problem moving forward?
So the thing with chlamydia is, as we mentioned, that yos will remain what's called latently infected. So once they're infected, then they're infected for life. So the ideal thing is that yos don't get infected in the first place. And if you do have yos that are infected, then potentially they can still spread to other yos in the flock. So the ideal situation, if everyone was to do it, was that you'd breed your own replacements and you wouldn't buy in anything and you wouldn't get chlamydia in the first place. But so it's a long-winded answer. But if you have chlamydia in the flock, the only tool that you have in terms of trying to manage it is vaccination. And if the flock are fully vaccinated, then you should nearly eliminate it in the following years. Yeah.
Okay, there's a number of questions around that topic there, John. So hopefully people will be take that answer on board. Another one here in relation to yours: can they be resistant to oxytocin injections, considering that it is a naturally occurring hormone?
No, but the problem with oxytocin is oxytocin is used because people, and James has said, you know, what's needed is more soybean meal and less oxytocin. The reason that people are using oxytocin in most situations is because the yolk drops and she's no milk, and you know they have the idea that the yolk will let down the milk. To my mind, if the yolk has enough milk in her udder when she drops her colostrum, then she doesn't need oxytocin to let it down. And if she doesn't have the milk, it doesn't matter how much oxytocin you give her, she's not going to make it in the first hour after dropping. It's going to take her a few days to come to milk. So while it can be useful in very rare occasions, I think that a lot of that poor milk letdown around lambing is down to poor feeding and management of the old pre-lambing.
Okay. Thanks, John. Again, there's a lot of questions in here, and a lot of them are in and around the same topic. But one here is in relation to how long after sending in swabs from an aborted fetus will you have the results, and is the abortion vaccine an annual shot or once only?
Yeah, so the swabs, we do them, we tend to do them every Thursday. So typically if they're in the lab before Thursday, you'll have results at the end of the week. And sometimes if it's very busy with swabs, they may be run twice a week. So usually it's not going to be any more than a week anyway. The vaccination then, is the abortion vaccine an annual shot or once only? So the abortion vaccine, so there's just to be clear, there's two different diseases that we're talking about vaccinating for mainly. So they're chlamydia and toxoplasmosis. They're two separate vaccines. There's one vaccine available for toxoplasmosis. There was only one available for enzootic abortion up until last year, the year before. Now there's another killed vaccine as well available for enzootic abortion. But with either of the live vaccines, then one shot. So you give the ewe one shot before she goes to the ram, and that provides, what they talk about is that provides 3 to 4 years of protection for the ewe. And practically that means that the one shot of either of those live vaccines protects the ewe for their breeding career, essentially.
Okay. And roughly, John, I suppose it's from my perspective, I suppose I'll ask the question on behalf of the farmers. Roughly, the cost of these vaccines, say for both vaccines or even individual vaccines, roughly, what are we talking about?
From memory now, I think it's somewhere around about €4.55 per shot. So you're looking at probably, if you want to protect for both, you're looking at probably around about a tenner euro, and that's then lifetime for the ewe.
Well, that's, as they say, that answers that question. James, we'll give John a break for a moment or two, and I know we're running a bit over time. Would you cull a ewe that has had a prolapse this year? Is it something that is likely to be repeated again next year?
Yeah, short answer there, very short answer, yes.
Yeah, okay. And what would you give a lamb for watery mouth?
Watery mouth, you'll be going in with an antibiotic, which a Spectrum Scour Halt. Which one would you recommend, John? Which would be most effective against?
Sure, if a lamb has watery mouth, the problem is when they have it, it's very hard to cure them because it gets septicemia. So you're probably, as you say, given Spectrum orally, and you're probably given injectable antibiotics to the lamb as well. But
you're fighting a losing battle, really.
Losing battle, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, sure, maybe both of you can answer this question, and I think I'm getting, I have all questions covered, or all topics that have been raised. Just a final question here. A lot of people, including this farmer, are giving Spectrum to the lambs at birth. Is there any resistance issues with this identified?
There is, yeah. So there's resistance. So what you're dealing with basically is an E. coli infection in the lamb, and E. coli have a high degree of ability to become resistant to antibiotics. So we would do a lot of testing of, not so much in lambs, but we do a lot of testing on the likes of E. coli in maybe related to mastitis in cows, and it would be one of the more common bacteria that would be resistant to a whole range of antibiotics. So it is an issue, and on farms where Spectrum has been used as the sole means of trying to prevent watery mouth for a number of years, it's nearly inevitable that there's going to be resistance to some extent on that farm to the antibiotic that's in Spectrum.
Okay. And John, just one final question for you, and I think I'll wrap it up after that, is fecal egg sample results showing a strong bile count of 50 eggs per gram. What would you be recommending?
I wouldn't be recommending anything. Again, this comes down to probably whether that sample has come from an adult sheep, i.e. ewe, or whether it's come from lambs or hoggets or whatever. But in any situation, 50 eggs per gram is quite a low level of worm eggs. So it's just showing that there is a background level of worms there. And what it's probably telling you is that it will be useful to take a sample again depending on the time of year. But if that was happening, say earlier in the year, you'll be talking about taking samples again in maybe a month's time, looking to see if your eggs per gram have increased. And typically, what people talk about is that if you're getting eggs per gram greater than 300 eggs per gram, depending on the type of sheep, whether they're young lambs or not, that's where you'll start to see the worms having an impact on productivity. So at 50, I wouldn't be doing anything.
Okay. Well, that's the two boys have answered all the questions that have come in so far, Seán. So I'll hand over
Great.
to you.
Great, Brian. Thank you very much. And yeah, a lot of questions in there. So great. So we stayed on longer than we expected, but it's good to get all those questions answered. I want to thank both James and John for doing two excellent presentations this evening and answering all those questions. So thanks, guys, for that, and thanks, Brian, for getting the questions put to them. Great. Sure. Look, we'll wrap things up. As I said, this video, or it is recorded, so a video of this will be available in the next number of days, and you'll be able to find it on our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channels there. As I say, going forward, Monday night will be the night that we'll be hosting webinars in the future, and we have one planned for the 22nd of February. And on that evening, we'll be covering TAMS and also covering a few other relevant schemes to most farmers that evening. So, okay, so thanks everybody for attending, and we'll talk to you again. Good night.
Very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.